This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through the business news stories you need to know about from the continent and beyond. But first, to run through the markets for you. Let's start with the JC. The top 40 is up by over 1,000 points since February started, up 1.15% in today's session. NASPA is also rising for the fourth consecutive day. The oil firm Sasol, however, is arguably the star of the show. It's gone up by over 19% so far this week to an 11-month high. It's buoyed, of course, by developments in the oil markets. The firm remembered it spent most of 2020 in pretty much survival mode. It managed to raise some $3 billion through asset sales, but it's also continuing to cut capex and operational costs as well. Nigeria's main index also has been in decline. It's actually fallen for 4 straight sessions, including today. It's trimmed the market cap over there by over $850 million. Index heavyweights like Dangote Cement have shed at least 6% since the start of the year. Here's what's coming up tonight. The COVAX initiative releases its vaccine distribution schedule, will gauge preparedness levels in Africa. Egypt's Monetary Policy Committee leaves rates unchanged for another month. And we'll explore why the IMF is confident about economic growth in the Middle East this year. Let's start the hour with a focus on the response to the pandemic. COVAX, that's the Initiative for Equitable Global Vaccine Access, says it's looking to distribute over 330 million vaccine doses by June. Now, this comes amid concerns over whether or not low-income countries will be left behind in immunization campaigns around the world. COVAX is co-led by the World Health Organization. It says the initial wave of doses will cover, on average, at least 3.3% of the total population of the 145 countries that are taking part. And that includes low and middle income countries, as well as richer ones like New Zealand, Saudi Arabia, Canada, and South Korea. The Minerals Council of South Africa says that mining companies will support the government in the rollout of COVID-19 vaccines as Africa's most industrialized nation continues to battle a surge in infections. Mining companies say they're well placed to support this vaccine rollout plan because of the decades of experience have built up in dealing with tuberculosis and HIV. Here's CGTN's Angela Coppola with the details.
The scale and reach of the vaccine rollout is the biggest ever undertaken in South Africa, affecting over 40 million people, and all business sectors in the country are involved.
I'm immensely encouraged by the positive sentiment from the mining industry as expressed by the Minerals Council towards the vaccine rollout. Mining companies are well placed to support the vaccine program, given their experience with managing tuberculosis and HIV amongst their employees. We must continue to ensure that the health and safety of mine workers remains a priority. But this must also apply to the mine workers' families.
The mining sector has widespread healthcare infrastructure in place. It's needed this to battle against tuberculosis and HIV/AIDS amongst its workers.
Mining, as you're aware, has significant healthcare infrastructure and capacity. That means in terms of healthcare workers and support services as well. And that will enable us to drive the vaccination process. And we certainly hope to play a constructive role as designated points of care under the Department of Health. And this would be particularly important in those regions where there are clusters of mines and mining communities, but also in those sometimes far-flung regions where mining is the dominant economic activity.
The mining industry contributes some 8% to the South African economy, and a vaccine rollout program driven by the sector will affect millions of people. That's over and above the 450,000 people who work on the mines.
Our conservative estimates are that we could vaccinate between 60,000 and 80,000 people a day, if we had the vaccine, of course. And so that would mean in about 2 months, we could vaccinate between 2.5 and 3 million people.
as health authorities finalize their plans for that vaccine rollout, they're going to need to call in all the resources they can find, including the mining sector and their massive health infrastructure. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
So that's the perspective from Africa's most industrialized economy. But what is the vaccine rollout plan in the continent's most populous nation? Let's find out. Deji Badmus joins us now live from Lagos. Deji, so Nigeria is scheduled under the schedule that COVAX released to get just over 16 million doses of the vaccine developed by the team from Oxford and AstraZeneca. Do you have any clarity, though, on when the doses will land in the country and who's getting priority for vaccination?
Well, Ramah, according to the Minister of Health here, he says the vaccine will arrive the country this month. That's February. Now, but no exact date, no definitive date now this month has been fixed. But we know what the minister has said is that the vaccine would definitely arrive here this month. And of course, 16 million doses have been expected, and that it will replace the initial 100,000 doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine now that was initially arranged for. So, and of course, this vaccine now that we're expecting, the one that's the AstraZeneca vaccine now, as you know, of course, it's easier to handle than the Pfizer vaccine, of course, because of the issue of cold chain storage. So we're expecting 16 million this month. Now, who are the people being considered to get the vaccine first? Well, first responders, that's healthcare workers now, the vulnerable, that's the aged and people with comorbidities. And then, well, according to the minister now, the strategic leadership of the country. So in this case, the president, the vice president, and some governors, of course, would get the vaccine. So that is going to be the priority for now. And subsequently, when others would come in, because the plan is that more would come in by March, then more and more people would get vaccinated. Ramah?
So how's Nigeria paying for all of this, though? Is this being funded out of the country's tax and oil revenue, or is it going to issue a sort of omnibus bond at some point to fund the cost of this entire exercise? Because we're talking about a country of hundreds of millions of people.
Well, first, there's been no clarity on that. But take your mind back to sometime last year, precisely April. The government actually, said it was going to apply for multilateral loans now, loans from multilateral institutions. The government did that. Of course, you know, it got $3.5 billion now from the IMF, 2.5 from the World Bank, and then $1 billion from the Africa Development Bank. So the understanding is that part of that funding would be used to procure this vaccine. And it's actually the federal government that is funding all of this. State governments are not involved. And you know, individuals, of course, cannot get the vaccine in the country at the moment. So it's the government that is dealing directly with the COVAX facility now. And the government is also trying to deal with other countries. For instance, it's considering the Chinese vaccine, the Russian vaccine. It's doing it government to government. So the government is funding all of this. And don't also forget that some of those that are coming from the COVAX facility, of course, I don't think will be requiring funding. We understand Gavi will be funding that. So, but give and take, it's actually the government that is funding all of this. And but this is not coming directly from the budget.
What about the consumer side of it? Are citizens going to pay for some or all of these vaccines, or is that entire cost, procurement, storage, distribution, is all of that being borne by the federal government?
Well, for now, all of that has been borne by the federal government. At some point, of course, the states would have to come in. When it comes to distribution, especially, the Minister of Health has made it very clear that the states would have to take responsibility for distribution because, you know, when the vaccine arrives, of course, it will be distributed to the various states. So from that point on, the state governments would have to bear responsibility for the funding and the logistics of that up to the last mile now where vaccination would be done. Now, there's no cost at all for now. There is no cost at all to any individual. That's no Nigerian would have to bear any cost. As I said, no Nigerian is allowed to procure this vaccine. In any case, you get the vaccine in, it will still have to be cleared by, approved now by the country's drug and regulatory agency, that's NAFDAC. So the government is dealing with all of this at the moment. It is funding it, it is taking absolute responsibility for it, and we understand the vaccine, of course, will be given free of charge. But as time goes on, Ramah, when, of course, the government would have achieved the 70% vaccination, that's 70% of the population now, maybe after that time, we'll begin to see, say, private medical institutions now begin to, basically inoculate people at a fee. But for now, the government says it will be free and at no cost to anyone at all.
Right. One last question for you, Deji. So we're seeing some states like Kaduna, for instance, they're planning to actually use UAVs to deliver vaccine doses where they're needed, partnering with Zipline for that particular project. But how are the logistics of moving these vaccines where they're needed, storing them, administering? Because we're talking about a massive amount of doses here, 16 million of them coming into the country this month alone, many millions more in the future. How's that being handled at federal and at state levels?
Well, the good thing for Nigeria now is that what the country is expecting is the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is, does not require the kind of cold chain storage that the Pfizer vaccine actually requires. So it makes it easier for the logistics of it. The government has actually got in place cold chain storage stores in about 3 or 4 locations, major cities. There's one in Abuja close to the airport. There's one here in Lagos. There's another one in Kano, that's northwest Nigeria. So when the vaccine arrived, the understanding is that it would be distributed to this major cold chain stores, and from there they would be sent to the various states. Kaduna State, for instance, is doing all of what it's doing just to be able to solve the problem of the cold chain storage. So what the government says it intends to do is to use, of course, as you've said, the drone now to send this vaccine to remote locations, because some of these places where the vaccine would be sent to are quite remote. It would be very difficult, for instance, to transport them by road and all of that, and then they'll require careful handling now, and that's the reason why the Kaduna State government says it plans to use drones now. We don't know what other state governments are doing, but for a state like Lagos, that is more like a city state, so to speak, we may not have that distribution challenge. But in some other states that are more rural, definitely there would be distribution challenge. But then the good thing is that the country would not be dealing with the much difficult to handle Pfizer vaccine here. It will be dealing with the AstraZeneca vaccine. And I think that's the reason why the government has chosen to go for the AstraZeneca vaccine. And I think it's also the reason why the COVAX facility is supplying this. I mean, because it knows that cold chain storage is a challenge, not just in Nigeria, but across the continent.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Deji Badmus in Lagos. Thank you. Now, Americans may soon have yet another option when it comes to the COVID-19 vaccine. The pharmaceutical firm Johnson & Johnson is looking for U.S. government approval for its version. The vaccine is creating quite a bit of buzz because it's a single shot that can be transported pretty easily. CGTN's John Terrett has this story from New York.
Johnson & Johnson, among the bluest of the blue chips. The bulk of its operation is in New Jersey, not far from Manhattan. J&J is one of America's best-known companies. It has 3 divisions: pharmaceuticals, household products, medical devices, and the pharma division is in the process of seeking approval for its eagerly awaited COVID-19 vaccine. J&J says its vaccine is 72% effective in the US and 66% effective overall. But unlike other vaccines, it can be administered in one jab, is faster to produce and easier to store. A game changer, according to the man who's become the face of the battle against the virus in the US.
It is very, very good with regard to cold chain requirements, namely requiring only a refrigerator.
The J&J vaccine was trialled on thousands of people in the US, Latin America and South Africa, and the company says it's effective against variants.
we're all in this together. We need as many of these vaccines to succeed as possible.
Dr. Richard Nettles is Vice President of Medical Affairs at Janssen Infectious Diseases and Vaccines, Johnson & Johnson's pharmaceutical division.
We've worked extremely hard for the last year on this one-dose approach. And the fact that it's one dose and being able to vaccinate a lot of people and removing the complexity of having to plan for and schedule and have people come back for the second dose, that's really, really important.
But on the day Johnson & Johnson announced the results of its phase 3 trials, the company's share price dipped a little. Wall Street noticed that the vaccine was less effective than some of the others. Could you address that issue and the vaccine's place in the armory against COVID-19?
Not only does it prevent disease, which the primary endpoint was met, but it also prevents severe infection. So 85% protection against severe disease. And we had complete protection against hospitalization and death 28 days after you received the vaccine.
So the J&J one-shot vaccine is expected to soon take its place in the battle against COVID-19. There may be a growing number of vaccines available out there from the US, Europe, Russia and China, but we're not yet able to pick and choose buffet style. So doctors advise, as every day without a vaccine risks serious illness or even death, if you can get one and you want one, whoever makes it, take it. John Terrett, CGTN, New York.
The rollout of COVID-19 vaccination programs in developed markets is providing a sliver of hope to Kenya's flour sector as the Valentine's season approaches relatively quickly. A survey by Kenya's Monetary Policy Committee shows that export orders for Kenyan flours are pretty strong. That's despite the uncertainty caused by rising new infections, the discovery of new variants of the virus, and of course a possibility of future lockdowns in key export markets. According to the survey, the current production of flours on Kenyan farms is back to about 90% of pre-pandemic levels as target markets reopen the economies. The average order levels for the next 4 months are expected to be around 97% of a pre-pandemic baseline. On to commodity of a somewhat different kind. Botswana's President, Mokgweetsi Masisi, says it's more vital than ever for the Southern African nation to diversify into other commodities. This comes after a pretty difficult year in the diamond market, which decimated government revenue. The COVID-19 pandemic aggravated weaknesses in diamond sales, which account for roughly 80% of Botswana's export earnings last year. The world's second largest diamond producer is now looking to diversify into other minerals like coal, for instance, of which it has an estimated 212 billion tons in mostly untapped reserves. Masisi says the government is talking to its neighbours about the development of infrastructure needed to export and process this fossil fuel. The state-owned Morupule coal mine, for example, is developing a mine that will boost output by at least a third this year alone. A private coal miner, Minergy, also started exporting coal to South Africa, big market for that fuel, in mid-2020. And we pick up on that theme of fossil fuels in our company news wrap. Royal Dutch Shell's profits last year dropped to its lowest in at least 2 decades as the coronavirus pandemic took a heavy toll on the global oil and gas sector. The Anglo-Dutch oil major's annual profit fell by 71% to just $4.8 billion. In a sign of confidence, however, Shell plans to raise its dividend in the first quarter of the year, and that will be the second slight increase since it cut its payout by 2/3 at the start of last year due to the pandemic. Shell shares were little changed at about 9:15 GMT, slightly underperforming the broader European energy index. The drone startup Zipline says it will start delivering COVID-19 vaccines in the countries in which it operates in April. The company will store vaccines in ultra-cold freezers at its distribution centers, and when a clinic needs vaccines, the drones can make a delivery in roughly 30 minutes. Zipline has been delivering medical supplies to rural areas in Rwanda and Ghana since 2016. It plans to add operations, as I mentioned earlier, in Nigeria this year as well. The consumer goods giant Unilever reported on Thursday that underlying sales growth for the fourth quarter was pretty much in line with estimates, buoyed by strong demand in emerging markets. Underlying sales are up 3.5% for the Anglo-Dutch maker of Dove soap, Hellmann's mayonnaise and Tresemme shampoo. Setting out its longer-term targets, Unilever says it would be laser-focused on driving top-line sales growth, and it will invest $1 billion in each of 2021 and 2022 in high-growth areas. That's a run through your company headlines. We're 20 minutes into the hour. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up. Egypt hits pause on monetary easing for another month as the coronavirus keeps global markets on edge. And the EU has released $6 million to boost health services in Somalia. We'll explore that and plenty more when we return.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference. Welcome back to the program. A story keeping a close eye on here for you before we get into rate decisions from up north. China's ambassador to the UN-sponsored conference on disarmament, Li Song, has welcomed the decision by the US and Russia to extend the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or START as it's more commonly known. Now, the two countries officially announced a 5-year extension of that agreement just 2 days before it was due to expire. Speaking on Thursday at the plenary meeting of the Conference on Disarmament, Ambassador Lee said the treaty would create conditions for the ultimate goal of general and complete nuclear disarmament. Now let's head over to Egypt. The country's Monetary Policy Committee kept rates on hold, effectively putting monetary easing on pause for yet another month as the pandemic keeps global markets on edge. According to the MPC, the deposit rate remains at 8.25%. The lending rate will be at 9.25%. After having cutting a combined 850 basis points in 2019 and 2020, authorities are trying to tread a very cautious path amid mixed signs of when the pandemic will actually ease. Egypt's policy rate is the highest after Vietnam and Malaysia, but overseas holdings in local treasury bills actually providing an interesting reading. That actually went up to an 11-month high of $26.9 billion in the month of January. Let's explore what this decision means for the North African economy. CGTN's Adel Makrouki joins us now with the latest on this from Cairo. Adel, let's start with a broad health picture because the COVID-19 vaccination program obviously is the one key thing that a lot of countries are trying to work towards. What's the timetable for the country's vaccination program and how does that factor into the rate decisions we're seeing from the Central Bank of Egypt?
No one knows actually what the timetable is. The health ministry has refused to give any time schedule for the rollout of the vaccine or give figures in terms of a target for the country to move forward. But what we know so far, according to the health minister, Helazay, just addressing the parliament earlier today, she said that Egypt has received 3 shipments of China's Sinopharm vaccine. The first of which has been enrolled. It was 50,000 vaccines received in December. The second and the third shipments have not been announced in terms of the details and the number of jabs that Egypt has received. But we know that Sinopharm's vaccine has been rolled out. Just last week, Egypt received another 50,000 vaccines from AstraZeneca. That's the overall picture. So we're talking about tens of thousands. We have no idea about the second and third shipment. At least the government has not announced it officially yet. And therefore, the figures of the vaccine that the country actually has is quite low to its 100 million population.
Indeed. So Egypt's central bank, of course, also did lower its inflation target at its last MPC meeting, going down to around a midpoint of roughly 7% at that particular event. But what is informing the CBE's view that inflation will remain low in the medium term, given all the disruptions we're seeing in logistics chains around the world?
So basically, it's fact, Rama. The CBE last year has projected in the last quarter about 9% for inflation. The actual was 5.2%, so way below what the CBE has been projecting. The 9% primarily foreseen for this year, at least the first quarter, was encouraged throughout the last year as well by the IMF for its financial program that Egypt is working with. But CBE wanted to drop that, and it has actually, with the government, dropped the foreseeable inflation rate on the medium term to about 7% by the end of the year. Currently, we're talking about 7.5%, and the reports monthly have been still getting lower. Why is that happening? Basically, Egyptians are not buying, they're not importing. We're seeing consumer prices actually reversing, reaching 18 months low. So all of these are indications that the inflation will keep more or less fit and going towards the projected, maybe even downturn. Some financial institutions say it could even reach 6%, not 7% by the end of the year. And remittances are increasing. They increased with about 12% last year. Instance, take November, which is an indication to the last quarter and the beginning of this year. November, year-to-year basis, it jumped 27%. So all of this gives confidence to the projection for the inflation.
Indeed. Egypt's currency, the Egyptian pound, was one of the better performers last year as well. What's the MPC's outlook with regard to key sources of foreign income? Tourism used to be a big one. Tourism sector obviously is on its knees pretty much around the world. And also shipping traffic through the Suez Canal. That's another key source. What's the outlook for the MPC on those two?
So basically, it will be flat or even getting worse, primarily for the tourism revenues, which has seen a $3.8 billion drop in quarter three in 2020. Overall, in the year, tourism revenues were about $4 billion in 2020. That's way less than what the country has made in 2019, which was an estimated around $13.1 billion US dollars. Occupancy rates in the tourism sector is somewhere from 10 to 15%, depending on which touristic city we're talking about. So it seems that tourism is not picking up. At best case, it should be flat until we see flight restrictions being removed. For the Suez Canal, last year it saw a limited drop, about $200 million less than the 2019. That's about 2.5% in the Suez Canal revenues. So that's sort of a good indication for the trade, or at least shipping in terms. It might shrink a bit more throughout the year if the pandemic kept its impact on global trade. Finally, as I told you, remittances is always the backbone that the government is relying on, as it is apparently picking up.
One last question for you. So Egypt's non-performing loans, that makes for very interesting reading, because they're relatively low. They actually fell last year from around 4.2% to around 3.4% at the end of September. How is it that NPLs in Egypt are so low, despite all the economic damage that we're seeing being inflicted by the pandemic?
It's pretty surprising and encouraging at the same time, Rama. The government has really managed to clearly engage with this file quite well. There have been huge stimulus packages, rescheduling debt dues for companies and SMEs. Basically everyone, even personal loans, have been given a break. We've seen that the government postponing installments due on almost everyone in the country for 6 months when the pandemic was first hit. And by the first 6 months months of the pandemic, we're talking about by June to September last year, the central bank has actually engaged in rescheduling or easing the debt in general. It approached about 97% of the country's entire debt. So that's a great performance and is expecting to go on. The government is putting $2 billion for this year in terms it needs to liquidate or push for other packages, stimulus packages for the financial sector. So $2 billion in the back pocket for the government. And overall, it is expected, of course, to affect the banking profits. We have Moody's expecting that the bank profit will be squeezed. They will still make profit, but not as much. We already seen it year to year dropping by about 14%. In quarter two, it dropped about 14% year to year. So the bank's profit might be affected by this program, but it is encouraging. And finally, Ramah, the top 10 banks in Egypt have seen the non-performing loans down to 2.5%, so better than the overall performance of the country.
Indeed, we'll see how this plays out over the long run. Adel Mahuki in Cairo, thank you very much. Now, let's head over to South Africa. The International Monetary Fund is warning yet again that the country needs to rein in its debt load and reduce its fiscal deficit. The fund held meetings virtually, of course, given the pandemic we're having, with South African government officials recently, and it reiterated the need for the country to get control of its poor fiscal health. South Africa's debt to GDP ratio is over 80% at the moment. The fiscal deficit is well over 10% of GDP. Here's CGTN's Sumitra Naidu with the details.
The IMF has been concerned about South Africa's rising debt burden for some time now. In its most recent communication with the country, the IMF again called on the government to urgently reduce debt. The IMF pointed out that South Africa's bloated wage bill is particularly worrying.
In our national budget, there is very, very little that is left because those wages are funded by raising debt in the capital markets. With South Africa's debt to GDP at 82%, means that there is very little in a rand that goes towards fixed investment.
The Treasury did flag the wage bill because of the country's dire fiscal situation. The wage bill accounts for 35% of the national budget. The unions fought back, calling on government to honour the 3-year agreement in place, but the courts ruled in favour of the Treasury, allowing it to freeze public sector increases. The unions, though, are not ready to back down.
I think public servants shouldn't bear the brunt of saying that you don't have the money now. There are other avenues, other entities where you have paid increases, and now you suddenly say, listen, you don't have the money to pay public servants as the whole, but yet you can pump money into failing SOEs like Eskom, SABC, and what have you, and then we suddenly end up with the problem.
The IMF said in order to reignite growth, reforms need to be implemented urgently that address Eskom and other state-owned entities. Growth in South Africa has been declining in recent years. The economy is still in a recession that was exacerbated by COVID-19. Unemployment is rising too, with the rate currently over 30%.
If South Africa is going to move forward, it needs to take the advice of the IMF at cutting down the wage of public sector workers urgently. So really here, I'm not arguing for complete privatization, I'm arguing for deregulation to allow SOEs to have competition and coexist alongside other firms.
The National Treasury has committed to reducing the fiscal deficit and stabilizing debt over the next 5 years. But part of the plans is a proposal to hike taxes, a move that some economists say will be ineffective and onerous to growth. They say that spending cuts may be the only solution at this stage. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, Somalia will receive about 1.22 million doses of the COVID-19 vaccine developed by teams at Oxford University and AstraZeneca through the COVAX facility. Authorities over there have also received nearly $6 million from the EU to boost health service delivery. Abdulaziz Billo has a detail from the seaside capital, Mogadishu.
Also help the government. The €5 million multi-year project is being funded by the European Union. The project gears towards preventing further community spread of coronavirus and strengthening the country's health service delivery thus recovering from the aftershocks of the COVID-19 pandemic.
5 million euros basically managed by the government, the federal government and WFP. We know that this is a partial contribution. Please make best use of it and let's keep our partnership alive, and from our side we will try also to continue helping you during the process.
This support will not only prevent large-scale community spread from COVID in hotspots, but it will also ensure that the project activities are aligned with our government vision and goal of leveraging such support to strengthen public health systems.
Somalia is one of the least affected countries in the world by the coronavirus pandemic. Health experts attribute this to lack of mass testing. However, authorities are warning its citizens to remain vigilant. In Mogadishu, the epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic in the country, only 2 state-run hospitals can handle positive cases, as private hospitals lack vital equipment to take care of serious cases.
Given epidemic is far from over, we need to continue to remain vigilant. Identify these hotspots rapidly, detect and track cases systematically, and make sure that the transmission chain is interrupted with the help of proven and effective public health measures.
The country recorded close to 4,500 positive cases of COVID-19 as per data from the Ministry of Health, with more than 100 confirmed fatalities. On Wednesday, the United Nations World Health Organization announced that Somalia will receive a first batch of 1.2 million doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine this month. Priority will be given to healthcare workers.
For this particular project, which aims at flattening the curve of COVID-19, meaning that we, as much as possible, we slow down the transmission from COVID-19 in the hottest spots. And at the same time, this project is going to contribute to health system strengthening, so that from the aftershock of this COVID-19, the health system recovers better, recovers stronger.
Immunization campaign against preventable diseases has also been affected by the coronavirus pandemic. Health authorities say the virus has reduced health gains recorded in recent months. Abdul Aziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Time for a break. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's on the other side. The IMF is expressing confidence about economic growth prospects in the Middle East this year. And natural catastrophes have heavily affected the insurance business in 2020. We'll have a review when we return.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. These are some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. Starting in Uganda, the former warlord in the country, Dominic Ongwen, has been convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity at the International Criminal Court. Ongwen is a former commander of the rebel group, the Lord's Resistance Army. He's been found guilty of 61 out of the 70 charges he faced. Ongwen was also convicted for a crime of forced pregnancy for atrocities committed against 7 women. 15 people who are said to be plotting to attack the UAE embassy in Ethiopia are to appear in a court in Addis Ababa after being arrested by Ethiopian intelligence officers earlier this week on Tuesday. The suspects allegedly planned the attack on the diplomatic mission, with individuals said to be abroad. Over in West Africa, market fire in Abuja, the federal capital, has left at least 6 people dead and several more injured. The outbreak at Tipper Market in Abuja's Gwarinpa district was reportedly caused by a spark in one of the shops in the early hours of Thursday morning. Local media reports that the market was engulfed in flames for 2 hours before firefighters eventually came to the scene. And further afield, Myanmar has blocked access to Facebook and its other services like Instagram and WhatsApp. The military ordered internet providers in the country to block those sites, saying it was for the good of the country's stability. Nearly half of the country's population is on Facebook. Earlier this week, the country's military seized power in a coup and detained State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi and the President Win Myint. That's a run through your headlines. Now, the International Monetary Fund says the economic recovery in the Middle East and North Africa is expected to accelerate this year following a double shock in 2020. Growth, however, will be somewhat uneven, according to the Washington-based lender, due to the unbalanced access across the region to the COVID-19 vaccines that are now coming into the market. The region, which includes all Arab countries and Iran, suffered one of its worst economic performances last year due to a decline in oil prices and sweeping lockdowns designed to prevent the spread of COVID-19. But while the region's economy, or rather its economic output, contracted by nearly 4% in 2020, the IMF expects growth of 3.1% this year and 4.2% next year, amidst a rebound in oil prices and the rollout, of course, of various vaccines.
This year we expect a recovery after a year, 2020, that was a year like no other, where the region faced one of the most severe dual shock. In 2021, we expect the economy of MENA to have a growth rate of 3.1%. And this is compared to a contraction like last year of 3.8%. In 2022, we expect growth to reach a level of 4.2%. The recovery this year for those countries will I would say will be stronger than the average recovery in the Middle East and North Africa. For example, for the case of the GCC, after a negative growth of 4.8% in 2020, we expect the GCC countries to have a positive growth of 2.5% this year.
China and the European Union, in the meantime, are working to promote their new investment agreement. On Thursday, hundreds of Chinese entrepreneurs, investors and experts met virtually with commercial representatives from the European Union. Their aim was to better understand this agreement and look at what both sides will get out of it. CGTN's Feng Yilei has the details.
The China-EU Comprehensive Agreement on Investment is waiting to take effect as it undergoes a rigorous legal review. But companies and investors say they are eager to embrace opportunities in promising sectors under the new framework. Experts believe the long-awaited deal is unprecedented and opens the door wide for European access to China's market and vice versa.
Most of it is about new opportunities in the manufacturing sector, which represent the bulk of European investment to China. But it also entails a lot of concessions within the services industry, whether they be telecommunication services or maritime services, banking, insurance.
Unlike traditional bilateral investment treaties, the CAI addresses not just market access. It's also expected to help correct what the EU viewed as imbalances in the relationship, ensuring an equal footing. This includes rules on state-owned enterprises, as well as greater transparency when it comes to subsidies.
They will feel more confident to invest in China, and perhaps they will consider to invest in China to develop new projects here. Secondly, China made very important commitments regarding sustainable development, labor law. Of course, this field is also a field of great opportunities, and we will see a lot of investment related to climate change, to energy transition.
Experts say the agreement will see both sides benefit from each other's advantages, forming a more complete global value chain. Namely, through Europe's advanced high-tech sectors and China's outstanding manufacturing capacity.
With market access relaxed, I think it brings a certain competitive pressure to Chinese companies. This will force them to increase their investment in research and development to find ways to retain talent and really improve the competitiveness of their products. So in fact, I think it's a good thing to have pressures to survive when it comes to market competition.
Experts say there will also be more joint ventures to exploit the market together, as China shows greater determination to promote higher level opening to the rest of the world. With the agreement in place, many Europeans at the meeting say more investment and more bilateral events are likely to bring the China and EU economies closer, increasing cooperation in other areas in the future. Feng Yilei, CGTN, Beijing.
Now then, away from that, let's move on to the car industry. The COVID-19 pandemic, of course, has had a huge impact on the car industry pretty much around the world. Sales in some key markets have declined, factories in others have been forced to close down. Juliet Mann examines how the UK and China's automotive sectors are driving growth in some pretty challenging conditions.
While the coronavirus hammered UK car manufacturing and demand, sales in China are recovering.
As far as global demand is concerned, of course, China is the one that came out of this first, and today China would represent about 20% of our global sales. So it is very, very significant. The Bentley brand fits very well with our Chinese customers.
The automotive sector already had some loose wheels. Technological change, green challenges, a shift in ideas about mobility, and in the UK, Brexit. 4 out of 5 cars made in Britain are exported, half to the EU. So striking a deal with Brussels is key to the car industry here. But as Britain's third biggest car export destination after the EU and the United States, China is an important market with big potential. That's why many UK car manufacturers have set up shop in China too.
China is, the biggest car market in the world, and one of the biggest markets for the premium and luxury brands in the UK in particular. So if you think of, Rolls-Royce, Bentley, companies like Jaguar Land Rover, this is a hugely important market for them. Jaguar Land Rover might sell only 20% of its cars in China, but maybe 50% of its profit comes from China. So it's absolutely critical for the firm that the Chinese market recovers. So, the UK and China are really interlinked when it comes to the automotive industry.
Britain has engineering and academic expertise. China is an important manufacturing hub, sales market and funder. The London Electric Vehicle Group, who make London's black cabs, is owned by China's Geely Group. Volvo Cars, Lotus and Proton are also part of Geely's fleet. And going electric could mean more opportunities for China in the UK.
Big investment has gone into various European countries in battery manufacturing on a really big scale. The UK is lagging behind. It really does need to attract a big battery manufacturer. Now, several of those are Chinese. There is a potential deal to be done there.
It's a bumpy road post-pandemic and post-Brexit. But as they lead innovation and help build investment, the UK and China's automotive relationship is gearing up for growth. Juliet Mann, CGTN, London.
The United Kingdom and the EU say they'll work together to try and reduce tensions on the border in Northern Ireland. Operations at ports in the country were suspended earlier this week as the impact of Brexit is causing some old divisions to resurface. CGTN's Ramah Nyang found this report.
People in Northern Ireland were told that Brexit wouldn't cause major disruption, but just days after the UK ended its transition period with the bloc, scenes like this highlighting the difficulty with the divorce. Checks on goods at 2 ports here have now been suspended after threats were made against staff.
We have asked them not to attend their duties today, and we will continue to monitor the situation and adapt accordingly.
At the heart of the matter is the Northern Ireland Protocol. It's an insurance policy that meant after Brexit, the region stays in the EU single market for goods. As a result, there are now new checks on items coming into Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK. That's angered local politicians here who want the new trade barriers to be scrapped.
I can tell her that we will work to ensure that there are no such borders. We will respect the peace process and indeed no barriers down the Irish Sea, and that the principle of unfettered access across all parts of our United Kingdom is upheld.
In a bid to calm tensions, British officials are meeting with local leaders and EU counterparts and have suggested relaxing checks at the border on key items like food until 2023. Watching on is EU member state Ireland, whose foreign minister called on all sides to diffuse tensions. And barely a month after Britain's total exit from the EU, this is a crisis that could have far-reaching consequences, not just for Europe, but for the future of a united kingdom.
Now, I know we've been speaking about the pandemic in one way or another for most of the hour, but let's put the pandemic aside for the moment. 2020 had multiple natural disasters, floods in China, cyclones in South Asia, wildfires, hurricanes, you name it. And the insurance industry is taking notice as climate change continues to add to a rising tide of damages and claims. CGTN's Mark New has that story on What's Hot tonight.
The reinsurance company Munich Re says natural catastrophes caused more than $210 billion in damages worldwide in 2020, the fifth most since 1980. Topping the list were floods in China and cyclones in Asia. Next came Hurricane Laura, striking the U.S. state of Louisiana and causing $13 billion of damage.
And we see this upward trend both with respect to overall economic losses and insured losses. If we go back to 1980 and until today, almost in each and every year, the vast majority of these losses were from weather-related events. So from flooding, windstorm, convective storms, but also wildfires.
Wildfires on the U.S. West Coast in 2020 played a big role in total catastrophe damages in the U.S., nearly doubling from the previous year to $95 billion.
We do see in California, for instance, with the wildfires, with convective storms, that's severe thunderstorms with tornado and hail, in regions in the United States, but also in Europe, we see an upward trend of losses over the last decades. So we really have to put this into a longer time frame. And this upward trend of losses cannot only be explained by socio-economic factors. Climate obviously plays a role.
I can tell you that over the past couple of decades, the number and severity of natural disasters has increased significantly, especially in the United States, but all across the globe. And it's problematic in a number of ways.
Griffin cites climate change and more people developing in wilderness areas as two key reasons for rising damage. Even though the U.S. does have a higher percentage of insured damages compared to most of the world, the pattern, he says, is still troubling.
The money to fund those losses comes from policies sold. So that means necessarily the premiums change. And so we can't keep collecting more and more funds to pay for more and more losses and just repeat that process. It's not good for the consumer, it's not good for the insurance industry, and it's certainly not good for the economy.
Griffin says the insurance industry, property owners, and communities need to come together to focus on prevention. Munich Re's climate scientist Rao stresses the importance of better land use planning. He also says measures to capture more greenhouse gases need to be implemented in order to have any chance of reversing the damaging trend. Mark New, CGTN, San Francisco.
A quick run through commodity prices. Brent has rallied pretty hard since the start of the year, but it's not quite got the momentum to break through the $60 a barrel mark just yet. Futures due in April were around $58.53 a barrel at 16.25 GMT, up 12% though since the start of the year. Copper forwards in London just barely positive on a year-to-date basis, but they're off the highs of over $8,000 a tonne hit earlier in January. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore how the COVID-19 pandemic inspired the revival of a domestic textile industry in Kenya when we come back.
Don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. A small textiles factory run by a devolved government unit in eastern Kenya hit the local headlines when it started making surgical masks and protective personal gear for health workers at a time when most supplies of that kind had to be imported in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now that we're 12 months into this unprecedented pandemic, what exactly has changed? CGTN's Nick Mudimba has the story of the Kitui County Textile Centre.
The Kitui County Textile Centre is the third biggest textile factory in Kenya and the first one set up by a county government in the country. It has rolled out a skills transfer program targeted at training community tailors in industrial garment production. Textiles and clothing account for 12% of total manufacturing value added in Kenya. The centre has employed 600 youths who have been trained in garment making.
We have engaged people of the low level, people who have not finished the education cycle in Kenya. The class 8 leavers, the Form 4 leavers, and who majorly are not productively engaged in their rural areas.
The 24-hour factory employed the youth who then went through a 3-month garment training course aimed at equipping them with the right skills. It is expected that these skills will help them earn the upkeep in the lucrative garment making market. Empowerment is the main priority here at Kikotek, and 80% of the workers here are actually women. But at the end of the day, the bigger focus is actually to strengthen the economic perspective of this region and the country as a whole. For them, it's all about coming up with quality products that will indeed sell Kenya and, of course, sell this county.
This is one of the ways of ensuring women empowerment. But then again, realize that if you look at our unemployed population, most of them are women. And they're the ones who are involved more so in the household, the needs of our households.
With the rise in the demand for face masks and PPEs due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the centre has considerably increased its capacity. This has helped create more jobs in the county at a time when many companies across Kenya have laid off workers and unemployment is rife.
We have now enough experience to produce quality garments for the export markets. So we are up in the next 2-3 years. We should be able to produce for not only Africa. Remember, COMESA is duty-free once you export. That's one of the opportunities we are looking at exploiting. The world over, we are looking at the US and other countries that can be able to import clothes from Africa.
The County Textile Centre had humble beginnings. It started off as a simple embroidery outfit stitching uniforms before inking a lucrative deal in 2019 to tailor over 6,000 uniforms for government security agencies in Kenya. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Kitui County, Kenya.
Quick update as far as currencies are concerned before we wrap up the program. Let's focus on the Egyptian pound, 1573, one of the better performers last year. It actually strengthened in a year when a lot of African countries' currencies were essentially weakening. The embassy statement had some interesting gems in it. I guess we have to get used to the idea that more and more of these statements will actually have a very heavy emphasis on health economics. So here's what the embassy said. They are concerned about pandemic infections, a surge in that, and the containment measures. That will certainly weigh heavily on the medium-term outlook. But just as important, the speed at which vaccines can be rolled out and the efficacy of said vaccines is going to be extremely important in how they essentially guide their rate decisions in the future as well. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour. Many ways to get your thoughts back to us. All of them are on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.